Repetition builds resilience because every time we decide to try again, we engage in the quiet but profound act of courage that pushes against fear, doubt, and the temptation to give up. And while repetition is often misinterpreted as a cycle of failure, it is actually the place where strength is formed, because repeating an action, a step, or even a stumble is proof that we are willing to keep showing up despite the uncertainty of outcome. And this willingness to return again and again is what slowly forges resilience in us, not through instant victories or flawless attempts, but through the process of practicing, failing, learning, and rising over and over until the effort itself reshapes who we are. And in this cycle, every attempt leaves a mark. Every effort adds weight to our endurance, and every small decision to continue strengthens our belief that falling down does not define us. Rather, it is the act of rising again that becomes our definition. And while success might seem like the destination, the true value lies in the repetition that builds us into someone who can withstand challenges, disappointments, and setbacks without losing the drive to keep moving forward, because resilience is not the absence of failure, but the courage to carry failure with us and still walk ahead. And repetition provides the training ground for this, reminding us that stumbling does not mean stopping, that cracks in our path are not the end of the journey, but invitations to grow sturdier, to dig deeper, to rise stronger. And every time we repeat something, whether it's an action, a practice, or even a recovery from loss, we build familiarity with discomfort. We grow accustomed to standing in uncertainty without collapsing. We practice patience when progress is slow, and we learn to trust that progress is happening even when we cannot yet see it, because each repetition layers endurance upon endurance until strength is not just something we hope for, but something we embody. And though the act of doing things again can often feel exhausting, even discouraging, it is precisely that exhaustion that tests and refines us, teaching us that resilience is not about being unbreakable, but about bending without snapping, failing without surrendering, falling without staying down. And in this way, repetition is less about perfecting the outcome and more about shaping the person who emerges from the process, because the courage to do something again means we are brave enough to expose ourselves to the possibility of failure in exchange for the certainty of growth. And that bravery, practiced repeatedly, becomes resilience, which carries us not just through one challenge, but through the many storms and trials that life inevitably brings. So the act of repeating is never wasted effort, but the invisible work that strengthens our inner core, carving patience, grit, humility, and faith into us, teaching us that progress is rarely linear, that growth is rarely visible in the moment, and that true courage is the choice to try again, even when the previous attempt left us bruised, disappointed, or doubtful. And in those moments of repetition, we discover that we are not weaker for having fallen. We are stronger for having risen, not fragile because we failed, but powerful because we dared to step forward once more. And this realization plants the roots of resilience deep within us, roots that hold firm even when everything around us feels uncertain, roots that remind us that the path forward is not built on a single flawless attempt, but on the countless decisions to try again, again, and again, until what once felt impossible becomes part of who we are. And that is the quiet, enduring courage born only through repetition. Progress hides in persistence, because the most remarkable changes rarely happen in dramatic bursts of effort, but instead emerge quietly through the steady rhythm of small steps repeated over time. And while our culture often glorifies sudden breakthroughs and overnight success, the truth is that transformation is almost always the result of consistency, of showing up even when the progress feels invisible, of taking one step today, another tomorrow, and another after that, until the accumulation of those steps creates a path we could not have imagined at the beginning. And though persistence often feels ordinary, even frustrating, it is precisely that ordinariness that makes it powerful, because each small effort compounds like drops of water wearing down a stone, gradually shaping something new and lasting. And in this process, patience becomes as important as effort, because persistence asks us to trust what we cannot yet see, to believe that small actions have meaning even when the results are not immediate, to keep watering the seed before the sprout breaks the soil, And in doing so, we begin to understand that growth is not always visible in the moment, but is happening beneath the surface, strengthening roots, building resilience, and preparing us for breakthroughs that will come when the time is right. And it is often in looking back that we realize how far we have traveled, how many small steps have added up to miles, how the habits we once thought insignificant have transformed into strength, clarity, and achievement. And this is the hidden power of persistence, that it works in silence, away from recognition, requiring discipline to endure repetition and faith to endure waiting, but delivering transformation that is deeper and more enduring than anything gained quickly. And though persistence may sometimes feel like an endless loop, it is in that very loop that change is happening, because every repetition strengthens not just skill but identity, turning actions into habits and habits into character, teaching us that what matters is not intensity for a moment but consistency over time. And so progress becomes less about sudden leaps and more about refusing to stop, about putting one foot in front of the other even when the road is long, about continuing to push when fatigue whispers that it doesn't matter, about trusting that each small step carries the weight of potential. And in this way, persistence acts like a quiet architect, building structures of strength within us, layering effort upon effort until something solid, something unshakable emerges. And though we may not notice the shift day by day, persistence is always at work, transforming doubt into belief, weakness into strength, and dreams into reality, because it teaches us that transformation is not an event but a process, and that the most powerful growth happens not when we try to do everything at once, but when we commit to doing something again and again, no matter how small. And so the hidden nature of progress and persistence is not a weakness but its greatest strength, for it asks us to lean into patience, to trust the process, to find courage in repetition, and to believe that small steps, even when unseen, are building the kind of transformation that lasts. Falling is part of forward motion, because movement toward anything meaningful is never smooth, never free of obstacles, and never a straight line. And while the world often convinces us that stumbling means we are unworthy or incapable, the truth is that every fall carries within it lessons that success alone cannot teach. For standing tall may feel secure, but it rarely challenges us. It rarely pushes us into the uncomfortable spaces where growth is forged. And it is in the act of falling, of losing balance, of colliding with the ground of our own limitations, that we learn resilience, humility, and adaptability, because falling interrupts the illusion of perfection and forces us to confront the raw truth of our vulnerability. And in that confrontation lies the opportunity to rise differently, to rise wiser, to rise stronger. And so each stumble is not simply a detour but a form of education, teaching us that strength is not about avoiding the fall, but about how we respond to it, about whether we stay down or whether we push ourselves back up, whether we view the ground as defeat or as a foundation from which to launch again. And though the fall itself may feel painful, humiliating, or discouraging, it strips away the layers of pride that often keep us stagnant, reminding us that growth is not about never falling, but about daring to move forward, knowing the fall is possible. Because every time we fall, we discover where we are still fragile, where we need to learn, where we must grow, and those discoveries shape us in ways that standing tall never could, as balance teaches stability, but imbalance teaches courage. And while falling can feel like failure in the moment, it is in hindsight that we recognize its value, realizing that the times we stumbled taught us patience when we were too eager, taught us humility when we thought we knew it all, taught us empathy when we saw that others, too, were struggling to rise, and each lesson becomes a thread in the fabric of our resilience, weaving together strength not from unbroken victories, but from scars and stories of every time we refuse to let the ground be our ending. And when we understand this, falling becomes less something to fear and more something to embrace as part of the journey. Because forward motion, by its very nature, involves risk, and risk will sometimes mean missteps, wrong turns, or total collapse. Yet without those moments we would remain rigid, untested, and unaware of what we are capable of surviving. And so the fall is not a sign we are going the wrong way, but a reminder that we are moving, that we are alive in the pursuit of something bigger, that we are choosing to lean into life rather than stand still in safety, and each stumble, as difficult as it feels, is also a gift of perspective, teaching us to appreciate the moments of standing tall more deeply, to recognize the strength it takes to move again, to understand that the ground beneath us does not end our journey but supports our rise, and in time we come to see that falling is not an interruption of forward motion, but a necessary rhythm of it, the downbeat that makes the rise possible, the pause that deepens the melody, and so every stumble becomes a teacher, every fall becomes a step, in every moment on the ground becomes part of the momentum that carries us forward. Vulnerability fuels growth because it asks us to walk into the unknown without guarantees, to expose ourselves to the possibility of disappointment, rejection, or failure, and still choose to show up. And while it may seem easier to hide behind walls of certainty or to retreat into comfort, real growth never happens in the spaces where we feel safe and in control. It happens in the fragile moments when we try again after a setback, when we take a step knowing we might stumble, when we speak even though our voice shakes. And in those moments of vulnerability, we discover that courage is not about the absence of fear, but about making the decision to act while fear is present. And setbacks test this more than anything else, because when we fall short or when life knocks us down, the easiest choice is to close off, to declare that trying again is pointless, to let the wound dictate our path. But vulnerability asks something different of us. It invites us to embrace the uncertainty of not knowing how the next attempt will unfold and still commit to showing up. And in doing so, we uncover strength that hiding never gives us, because growth is not born from perfection, but from persistence, from the willingness to stand back up with the scars of the last fall still visible, from the honesty of admitting that we are afraid, but that we refuse to let fear have the final word. And this openness transforms us, shaping us into people who are not defined by what broke us, but by how we chose to return to the world afterward, because every setback, when met with vulnerability, becomes a classroom where we learn resilience, empathy, humility, and patience. And these are the qualities that deepen us far beyond what unbroken success could ever teach. For without vulnerability, we stagnate, trapped in the illusion of safety, but with vulnerability we expand, stretching into versions of ourselves we did not know were possible, and this is why vulnerability fuels growth. It demands that we risk being seen as imperfect, that we risk failure not once but again and again, that we embrace the discomfort of uncertainty and walk through it with open hands instead of clenched fists. And the more we practice this, the more we learn that showing up, even wounded, is an act of profound strength, that admitting our fears makes us braver than pretending we have none, that choosing to try again after being knocked down is not weakness but proof that our spirit is unbroken. And over time, this practice of vulnerability builds a kind of inner courage that cannot be shaken by outcomes, because it is not tied to whether we succeed or fail. It is tied to the simple, radical act of presence, of standing in the arena even when the odds are against us, of saying yes to life in all its unpredictability. And so each time we embrace vulnerability, each time we choose to show up instead of retreat, each time we risk trying again, we grow, not only in skill or achievement, but in depth, in humanity, in the kind of resilience that allows us to face the next uncertainty with a little less fear and a little more trust in our ability to rise. Joy in the process, not just the outcome, matters because the real measure of growth is not confined to the final achievement, but lies in the countless unseen moments that shape us along the way. And too often we are taught to chase only the finish line, to believe that fulfillment exists only when the goal is reached. But the truth is that life unfolds in the steps, in the struggles, in the attempts that precede the destination. And the deeper gain is found in who we become while we are striving, because every challenge faced, every moment of doubt overcome, every small victory celebrated, And every setback endured contributes to a transformation that no trophy, title, or milestone alone can deliver. And when we shift our focus from rushing to outcomes toward engaging with the process itself, we begin to notice that joy is available even in difficulty, that meaning can be found in effort, and that satisfaction grows when we allow ourselves to be present in the journey rather than postponing happiness until the end. And this perspective reveals that the process is not a barrier to achievement, but the very soil in which achievement grows, shaping our character, refining our resilience, and expanding our capacity to endure and to hope. And though the outcome may glitter for a moment, it is the process that lingers because it teaches us patience when results are slow, humility when pride tempts us, discipline when distractions arise, and gratitude when progress, however small, is recognized. And in these lessons we become people who are not defined by a single moment of success or failure, but by the depth of who we are becoming, because the person forged along the way is the true reward, a person who has learned that stumbling is not the end but part of forward motion, that persistence is not glamorous but profoundly powerful, that vulnerability is not weakness but a source of courage, and that joy is not reserved for the moment we arrive, but can be found in the act of showing up today, doing the work, embracing the uncertainty, and moving forward. And when we hold joy in the process, we no longer see the journey as an obstacle to overcome, but as the very essence of life itself, where meaning is created not in distant destinations, but in the daily steps of persistence, practice, and presence, so that even if outcomes differ from what we imagined, we still walk away transformed, carrying the gain of wisdom, resilience, and inner strength that no external achievement could fully capture. And in this way, the journey ceases to be a means to an end and becomes a living expression of growth, reminding us that the truest victory is not what we hold in our hands at the finish line, but who we have become in the process of getting there. From struggle to story is the journey that defines our deepest strength, because every time we face hardship, endure disappointment, or walk through pain, we are not simply surviving isolated events, but weaving experiences into a narrative that reveals resilience, courage, and growth. And while in the moment struggle feels heavy, even unbearable, it is within that very weight that the raw material of our future story is being shaped, because what we repeat, what we endure, and what we rise from transforms into chapters of strength that cannot be written any other way. And this is why people who seem unshakable are not those who have avoided difficulty, but those who have walked through it, carrying scars that tell of battles faced, and won not always with glory, but with persistence, and every repetition of effort against resistance. Every step taken when giving up felt easier. Every time we stood again after falling becomes a thread in the fabric of our narrative, a reminder that we are not defined by the blows we take, but by the ways we respond. And while it may be tempting to wish away our struggles, to hope for lives of ease, it is struggle that gives rise to the story that inspire, the stories that remind us who we are, because ease leaves little to tell but difficulty, faced with courage, becomes the proof of our endurance, and in this way our struggles are never wasted. For even when they leave us shaken, even when they take longer to rise from than we expect, they carve into us truths about our own strength, humility, and capacity to hope. Truths that later serve as guides not only for ourselves, but for others who see in our story the reflection of their own battles and what we repeat, whether it is practicing patience through hardship, choosing hope in despair, or returning again to the work of healing, becomes part of the rhythm of resilience, a rhythm that deepens with each endurance, with each rise, until the story of our life is not one of avoidance, but of triumph through persistence. And though the world often celebrates only the outcomes, the quiet truth is that the most powerful stories are written in the hidden, difficult spaces where we kept going, where we endured what seemed impossible, and where we rose not once but many times, each rise reshaping us into someone stronger, someone braver, someone more compassionate. And as this story unfolds, we begin to see that struggle itself does not diminish us, but becomes the proof that we are capable of carrying more than we ever imagined, that we are capable of rising higher than the weight that tried to hold us down. And with each endurance, we gain perspective, learning that setbacks are not permanent endings but temporary pauses, that wounds can heal into wisdom, and that the narrative of strength is written not in avoiding pain but in transforming it. And so the story of our strength is not one of untouched perfection, but of scars that speak of survival, of voices that broke but kept speaking, of hearts that ached but kept beating. And these are the stories that carry us forward, that remind us of our worth, that inspire us to keep going, because from every struggle emerges a story, and from every story emerges the undeniable truth that we are stronger than we once believed.